Now, the implementation of the new internet censorship law hasn't reduced concerns over cybercrime. Content strategist at Know Before Africa, Anna Collard, says many people are troubled by internet criminality. But she says most people mistakenly believe that they have the ability to protect themselves from criminals. This is called, quote, unconscious incompetence. To discuss this further, I'm now joined by Anna Collard virtually from Cape Town. Anna, thank you so much for your time this evening. Some very interesting findings from this report and the survey that you and your team have put together. And of course, the world, the cyber world, has really changed. In fact, it's sped up by probably 20 years just in the last 2 years alone because of our massive dependency on the internet, on the cyber world, because of the pandemic. What has this latest report told us about how people's activities on the internet and how they look at cyber activity and cyber crime, how has it changed as a result of the pandemic?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. The pandemic or the whole remote working kind of forced situation has leapfrogged the digitization and the sort of digital transformation across the world, not just in Africa. But what the survey that we do, we conduct that every year in December. And this was the third one. So we had a 2019 one just before COVID hit, and then quite interesting to compare the stats from the year before and then from just now in December. And what we've seen there is that across 8 African countries, South Africa being one of them, more than 50% of the respondents will continue to work from home, even once the pandemic has completely subsided. That doesn't mean that they necessarily completely work from home. It's more sort of a hybrid setup, but it really has made people more dependent on the internet and on sort of digital media. And with that, obviously, are a whole lot of additional risks that people are faced with. And unfortunately, they're not necessarily adequately equipped to protect themselves against those threats.
Now, pre-pandemic, with most people accessing or spending most of their internet time on their computers at the office, cyber security was the problem of the IT department at your office. How much more difficult has this made work for companies in keeping their internet structures safe, because you now have people dialing in, for want of a better phrase, from their various networks at home into their work networks as well? It must make things very, very difficult for those whose job it is in a company to keep everybody secure.
Yeah, and I think when we look back to when COVID first started, big companies literally had a couple of days to set up whole infrastructures for work from home, with thousands of employees that may never in their lives even worked on their laptop, that had desktops at the office. So it was quite sort of an extreme situation. And what the companies had to do is sort of roll out projects that would take months, if not years, to roll out before. And then obviously the cyber safety or the security part of it was maybe not at the forefront of the priorities list. However, what we found is even though, in terms of technology, and in the last 18 months or 2 years nearly now, it's been, we do have technology that allows the IT departments to manage even a distributed environment where people work from home, like the technology side of things. But what happens is exactly what you said. When I go into the office, I have that more warm, fuzzy feeling that the IT department looks after us. And that's actually not quite true, because even in the office, you may be under attack from what is called social engineering or human hacking. And those are really some of the tactics that the cyber criminals use to trick us, or trick you, the human, into, for example, clicking on a phishing link that, even if you have the best sort of security technology around it, if you happen to click on that particular email, or you open up an attachment, or you go to a website that then downloads some malicious software, that's how they sort of circumvene the technology side. And obviously being locked at home without having your surrounding colleagues or the IT departments around the corner, it's even more so possible, or makes people susceptible to fall for these social engineering scams, particularly if you're slightly stressed or anxious, or if you have to deal with kids and sort of distractions at home. So that really puts the human aspect of cybersecurity at quite significant risk.
Now, your research found, or your survey found, that the number of people concerned about cybercrime has risen to 72%. But at the same time, like you said, you use the term people suffer from unconscious incompetence. Explain to us what you mean by that. And also, are we also our own worst enemies, that we're just not logical when it comes to things that we click on, especially in our email inboxes, which according to your report says is our biggest problem. Our email inboxes is really giving access to all kind of bad guys out in the cyber world.
Yes, exactly. So if I go to the unconscious incompetence question, it's exactly that. It's things that I don't even know that I don't know. So what happens is that particularly the younger generations, they feel that they are tech savvy and they know what they're doing, and they won't fall for anything because they're too clever, right? And what we found in the survey, and we use these kind of qualifying questions, is that on the one hand side, it's great that people say they are concerned and that they feel that they're quite confident that they would recognize an incident. But in the same sort of survey, we then ask them, well, would you recognize what's called a ransomware attack or an extortion attack? And more than half, I think it was 55% of the respondents, did not know what that was. And that's quite a common cyber threat at the moment. Also, from a controls point of view, something that we recommend everybody to do is to enable what's called multi-factor authentication. So that's your username and password plus something that you have, like a one-time password app on your phone, which you should have on all your financial accounts, your crypto wallets, your email accounts, etc. And a lot of the respondents, again, I think it was more than 35%, did not know what that was. So that shows us that on the one hand side, they feel they're confident, but they actually don't even recognize the most basic of sort of controls and threats. So we have to do more as an industry to educate the consumers, to educate also from what you mentioned there, from being our own worst enemy. So the social engineering aspect, it's really about critical thinking at the end of the day. It's about being aware and in the moment that when anything comes in, be that via social media, be that, which is the hype at the moment, all these crypto scams, that I don't just click on it. I don't feel that, or if I feel that FOMO or any sort of emotion, that I should take a breather first, slow down, and then look at it critically before I act. Because that's where they get us, is when we act too quickly, when we sort of feel pressurized, if there's a slight sort of sense of fear or any emotion, really, even positive one, that makes this unfortunately vulnerable.
Yeah, and you're speaking of vulnerable, it's probably our most vulnerable people that are the ones that get caught out by this. At least I think we've got a working or unspoken rule in my family with my mum on WhatsApp. If you get anything that you're not sure where it's from, send it to us first and we'll tell you whether or not you can click on it. One last thing before I let you go. If we could leave people with just one practical tip. I mean, your survey found that more than 30% of users do not know what two-factor authentication is. You just mentioned that. 40% are not using secure passwords. And I did have to have a giggle at this because you said 20% believed that password was a strong password. Now, password written with the @ sign and the $sign and an exclamation mark. At first, I thought it was a rude word, but I looked at it properly and I realized what you were saying. But you call that poor password hygiene. One last tip from people, is that the first step in ensuring that you at least have the first level of safety around your cyber life?
Yes, and I guess passwords are the bane of our existence. They really, it's impossible to remember all these long, unique passwords. However, one thing that I can maybe, if it's one thing that I can just appeal to everyone, is get a password manager. It's like a little plugin that you can get both on your phone as well as on your computer that will remember strong and unique and long passwords for you. So all you need to do is come up with a very long password phrase, for example. In my case, I use a song and then the first letters of that song that you can use to actually impress people, because it shows that you can remember this long password. Meanwhile, it's just a song. And then that manager will do the rest for you, and then combine that with the multi-factor authentication. It really is important. It's our digital identity, and we need to take care of that.
Okay, I think so many of myself and my colleagues are taking note because, goodness, our IT department has asked us to make up the longest passwords on earth, and sometimes you just can't remember. Would you rather want a drop of my blood? Doesn't that just make it easier? Anyway, they weren't impressed with me. That's Anna Collard. She is from Know Before Africa. Some great tips there on how we can keep ourselves cyber safe.